The massive iron gates of the Ashford estate stood like sentinels guarding a fortress of loneliness, their ornate patterns casting long shadows across the empty driveway every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every holiday that families were meant to celebrate together. Inside the sprawling mansion with its 42 rooms, crystal chandeliers that could illuminate a small town, and windows that overlooked manicured gardens stretching for acres, Victor Ashford sat alone in his study. The silence so thick it felt like a physical presence pressing against his chest. At 73 years old, he had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. A reality that became painfully clear each time the calendar marked another holiday, and his phone remained silent, his dining table set for one, his life a monument to choices he could never take back. Victor hadn't always been alone. 20 years ago, his mansion had been filled with laughter, with the sound of his daughter Elena's footsteps racing through the marble halls, with music and warmth and the kind of love that makes a house feel alive. But pride is a poison that works slowly, destroying everything it touches with methodical cruelty. When Elena fell in love with Daniel, a school teacher with more heart than money, Victor had drawn a line in the sand. He told his daughter she was throwing her life away, that she deserved someone from their world, someone who could match their status and wealth. The argument that followed shattered their relationship like glass hitting stone, sharp and irreversible. Elena left that night with tears streaming down her face and a suitcase in her hand, and Victor, stubborn and certain he was right, let her go. He told himself she would come back, that she would realize her mistake and return to the life he had built for her. She never did. If you believe in the power of second chances, in the possibility that it's never too late to heal what's broken, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope and redemption to the world. Now, let's continue with Victor's journey. The years passed like water slipping through his fingers, each one taking a piece of his certainty with it. Victor built his business empire higher, made his fortune larger, acquired properties and assets and everything the world told him represented success. But success, he discovered, tastes like ash when you eat it alone. He hired investigators to find Elena, not to apologize, but to check on her, telling himself it was just to ensure she was safe. The reports came back with facts that felt like accusations. She had married Daniel. They lived in a modest home in a small town 3 hours away. They were happy. That last word hurt most of all. Happy. Without him, without his money, without the life he insisted was the only one worth living. His pride wouldn't let him reach out, wouldn't let him admit he had been wrong. So he convinced himself that if she wanted him in her life, she would make the first move. She didn't. And the silence between them grew deeper with every passing year, until it felt like an ocean neither could cross. Christmas Eve arrived like it always did, with the town below the hill twinkling with lights and joy, while Victor's mansion remained dark, except for the single lamp in his study. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had left earlier after trying once again to convince him to at least decorate something, anything, to acknowledge the season. He had waved her away with the same excuse he gave every year. Decorations were for families, and he didn't have one anymore. He was pouring his third glass of whiskey when the doorbell rang, a sound so unexpected in his world of scheduled appointments and announced visitors that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. The bell rang again, more insistent this time, and Victor hauled himself up from his leather chair, irritation mixing with curiosity as he made his way through the cavernous hallways to the front door. When he opened it, the cold December wind rushed in, but it was nothing compared to the shock that froze him in place. Standing on his doorstep were two girls, identical twins who couldn't have been more than 12 years old, with dark curly hair and eyes that struck him like lightning because he knew those eyes. He had looked into similar ones every time he gazed at old photographs of Elena. They were shivering in thin jackets that were wholly inadequate for the weather, and between them, they held a worn cardboard box that seemed to contain all their worldly possessions. The girl on the left spoke first, her voice trembling but determined. She said they were Sophia and Grace Martinez, and they had walked 2 miles from the bus station because they didn't have money for a taxi, and they were looking for their grandfather because their mother had died 6 weeks ago, and the social worker said they had no other family. But there was a name in their mother's papers, Victor Ashford, and they had nowhere else to go. The world tilted sideways. Victor gripped the door frame as the words crashed over him like waves, each one pulling him further from the shore of the life he thought he knew. Elena was dead. His daughter, his only child, the girl he had let walk away 20 years ago over his own stubborn pride, was gone. And these children, these beautiful, terrified children standing in the cold, were his granddaughters, a part of Elena that still existed in the world, and they had come to him as a last resort. Not because they wanted to, but because they had run out of options. His mind raced through calculations. Elena would have been 42, which meant she had these girls when she was 30, which meant for 12 years he had been a grandfather and never knew it, never got to hold them as babies, never saw their first steps or heard their first words, never had the chance to be part of their lives, because his pride had built walls too high to see over. He could have closed the door. Part of him, the part that had spent 2 decades protecting himself from the pain of his choices, wanted to. He could have called social services, had them taken somewhere official, somewhere that wasn't his problem. He could have maintained the fortress of solitude he had built so carefully, kept his life exactly as it had been for 20 years. But as he looked at Sophia and Grace, at the way they held hands for courage, at the hope and fear mixing in their expressions, at the way they had his daughter's eyes and apparently her determination, something inside him cracked. It was a sound he felt rather than heard, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. And suddenly he was crying for the first time in decades, tears streaming down his weathered face as 20 years of regret came pouring out in a flood he couldn't control. He stepped aside and opened the door wider, and the simple act of invitation felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. The girls hesitated, clearly unsure whether this weeping old man was safe or stable, but the cold made their decision for them. They stepped inside, and Victor closed the door behind them, sealing them all into a moment that would change everything. He led them to the kitchen, the warmest room in the cold mansion, and as they sat at the counter he had never used because he always ate in his study, he made them hot chocolate with trembling hands, grateful that Mrs. Chen kept the pantry stocked, even though he never asked for such things. The girls wrapped their frozen fingers around the warm mugs, and slowly, in halting sentences interrupted by his tears and their uncertainty, the story emerged. Elena had been sick for over a year, cancer that started quietly and spread with vicious efficiency. Daniel had died 5 years earlier in a car accident, and Elena had been raising the twins alone, working 2 jobs to keep them fed and housed, never asking for help from the father who had rejected her choice to live a life built on love rather than money. She had kept Victor's name in her papers, not because she wanted anything from him, but because she wanted her daughters to know they had family, to have options if something happened to her. The girls had been in foster care since Elena's death, moved between 3 homes in 6 weeks because the system was overwhelmed and 2 kids were harder to place than 1. And they had finally convinced a sympathetic social worker to let them try to find their grandfather before being separated and sent to different families. They had used the last of their mother's belongings to buy bus tickets, had walked through the cold because they spent their remaining money on a chocolate bar to share, and had arrived at his gate with nothing but hope and desperation. Victor listened to every word as if it were a sacred text, each sentence a revelation of how much he had missed, how much his daughter had suffered while he sat in his mansion counting his money and nursing his pride. He learned that Elena had been happy despite her struggles, that she had taught her daughters about kindness and resilience, that she had told them stories about growing up in a big house with a father who loved her before everything fell apart, stories that made Sophia and Grace want to know him even though they had never met. The realization that Elena had spoken of him with love rather than bitterness nearly broke him completely. She had forgiven him even though he had never apologized, had held on to the good memories instead of the painful ending, had given her daughters a grandfather in their imagination because he hadn't been there in reality. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe in the healing power of family and forgiveness, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement means the world to us and helps these stories reach more people who need them. The days that followed transformed the mansion in ways that had nothing to do with money or decoration. Victor called his lawyers and started the process of becoming the girl's legal guardian, a process that would take months, but that he pursued with the same determination he had once applied to business deals. He enrolled them in the best school in the district, bought them clothes and books and everything they needed, but more importantly, he gave them something no amount of money could purchase: his time, his attention, his heart. He taught them to play chess in the library, walked with them through the gardens as they told him about their mother, sat with them during thunderstorms when they felt scared, and slowly, day by day, learned what it meant to be the family member he should have been all along. The mansion that had been a mausoleum of regret became a home filled with the sound of laughter and footsteps and life. Christmas morning arrived 3 weeks after the girls had appeared at his door, and Victor woke to find Sophia and Grace standing by his bed, excitement radiating from them despite their nervousness. They had used their allowance to buy him a present, they told him, something they made themselves. He opened the carefully wrapped package to find a photo album they had created, filled with pictures of Elena they had brought in their cardboard box. Photographs of a life he had missed captured in images he had never seen. His daughter as a young woman, as a mother, laughing and loving and living fully despite everything. On the last page was a new photo, one the girls had somehow taken and printed. The 3 of them together in the mansion. Victor with his arms around his granddaughters, all of them smiling. A new family being born from the ashes of old mistakes. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to choose love over pride, please comment below and tell us what lesson you're taking from Victor's journey. Your words could inspire someone else who needs to hear them. Victor Ashford had spent 20 years in a mansion filled with everything except what mattered, had let pride build walls that kept out the only thing worth having. But twin sisters had arrived with nothing but hope and a cardboard box, and in choosing to open his door, he had opened his heart. The holidays would never be empty again, and neither would he. Sometimes second chances arrive shivering on your doorstep in the form of the family you thought you had lost forever, offering you the grace you never deserved but desperately needed. All you have to do is be brave enough to let them in.